What do you do when you can't see the danger coming, but your own family pretends nothing's wrong? That night, a simple walk with my guide dog became the beginning of something I never saw coming. Margaret always walked at 7:30 sharp. Routine, she believed, was a lifeline, not a leash. That and Max, her golden retriever with the temperament of a Zen monk and the reflexes of a caffeine-addled squirrel. For 10 years, Max had been her eyes in a world too happy to pretend the blind didn't exist. They walked their route along Maple Avenue. All clipped hedges, polite neighbors, the occasional rogue raccoon, and exactly 2 potholes you could set your watch by. She didn't need vision to see her own life had become just another background for other people's stories. The neighbors would smile as they passed, sometimes with real warmth, more often with that peculiar pity reserved for people you hope never become you. She could feel it, the careful words, the forced brightness. But Margaret was used to it. What she wasn't used to was the way her family had started treating her since Dad died. It was subtle at first, little things like her sister Janet showing up just to help, but rearranging the furniture so Margaret would trip, or her nephew Henry asking, with exaggerated patience, if she needed the big numbers on the microwave again. As if she hadn't lived alone for 20 years. But that night, as Max paused at the corner, tail up, every muscle coiled, Margaret had that prickling at the base of her neck. Not fear exactly. More like the memory of fear. "Good boy, Max," she whispered, fingers curling in his fur. "Let's get it over with." She could feel the shift in the air. No birds. No laughter. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade, replaced by a silence thick enough to choke on. She thought she heard footsteps, too light for a neighbor, too slow for a jogger. "Evening, ma'am." The voice behind her was wrong, too close, too smooth, a snake wrapped in a polite suit. Margaret's heart slammed once hard. She turned as if sight would help, and Max pressed closer, his breath hot and trembling. "Do I know you?" Margaret managed, keeping her voice flat. Janet always said Margaret had the subtlety of a frying pan, but now it was all she had. The man laughed. "Just out for a stroll. Looks like you could use some help." She heard the metallic scrape, soft but not soft enough. She'd never seen a knife, but she knew the sound from 1,000 late-night movies. Only this wasn't fiction, and there was no audience to scream at the screen. Max bristled. For the first time, Margaret felt his muscles bunch under her palm, the fur along his neck rising like a ridge. "You sure?" she said, forcing steel into her tone. "I've got help." "Lady, you really don't." And that was when the world shrank. She could taste metal in her mouth, hear her own heartbeat. In the darkness behind her eyes, a memory, Janet sighing, "You'll be fine. Nothing ever happens here." She nearly laughed. Right. She heard the knife slice the air, closer, and Max changed. He wasn't her gentle giant anymore. He was something ancient, teeth bared, chest rumbling. Margaret had never felt so powerless or so protected. What happened next wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing her family would never believe her. Not unless something broke. What if the real danger isn't the stranger with the knife, but the family waiting for you at home? When Margaret finally escaped, she never expected her own sister to twist the knife even deeper. The knife never touched her. Max lunged, his body snapping from discipline to pure instinct. She felt rather than saw the chaos. Snarling, the man's curse, a rush of feet. Max's leash tore from her hand, his weight gone, and then dead silence. For a long 6 seconds, Margaret thought she was alone. Then breath, ragged, canine, alive. Max pressed into her, trembling, his tongue rough against her palm. She stood frozen, waiting for help that never came. The stranger was gone, maybe limping, maybe bleeding. Margaret would never know. All she knew was the smell of fear and wet dog, and the sound of her own heartbeat crashing in her ears. By the time she got home, the world was already different. Janet was there as always, waiting with her usual "I made tea," and the unspoken judgment hovering like a bad smell. "Late again, Mags?" Janet's voice was too sweet. Did you get lost? Or did your bodyguard drag you off course? Margaret nearly snapped but swallowed it. There was a man. He had a knife. Janet's eyes widened, just enough to be insulting. A knife? Oh, Margaret, are you sure it wasn't just some teenager playing a prank? Max attacked him. Margaret's hand shook as she poured tea. He saved my life. Janet laughed. That dog can barely bark at a squirrel. Are you sure you're not? She paused, that too familiar pity settling in. You know, making it up? You've always had an imagination. Margaret's jaw clenched. You think I want to imagine this? Janet leaned in, her perfume cloying. Maybe you need more help around here. It's not safe, Margaret. I could stay. Move in even. Or we could talk about the assisted living place again. There it was. The knife in her own kitchen. She'd been threatened in the street, but at home the assault was quieter, sharper. Margaret looked at Max, who lay at her feet, eyes watchful, body coiled and ready. For the first time she wondered who she needed protection from more, the world or her own family. She took a long, slow sip of tea, letting the bitterness settle on her tongue. Janet would never believe her. Maybe she didn't want to. Maybe it was easier to think of Margaret as helpless, someone to manage, rather than a sister who could stand her ground. That night, Margaret lay awake, Max pressed tight against her side, the memory of teeth and knives echoing in the dark. She thought of Janet, of all the little indignities and the big ones too, and for the first time she was afraid of more than just strangers. How do you fight for your independence when everyone's convinced you're already defeated? Margaret's battle for truth turns her own family against her, and a secret from the past begins to crack wide open. The next morning brought more than a headache and a stiff shoulder. It brought Janet, hovering in the hallway, arms crossed, ready for war in a pink cardigan. Margaret could feel her sister's skepticism before she even opened her mouth. You can't keep pretending, Margaret. Janet started, voice so soft it was practically venomous. Last night scared you. I saw it. You're not safe alone. Margaret ground her teeth. She barely slept, haunted by the memory of Max's sudden transformation. Her gentle guide dog turning savage, then curling into a trembling ball by her side. She wanted to thank him, to reassure him. But Janet never missed a chance to turn worry into control. I'm fine. Max is fine. I'll call the police myself, Margaret said, moving past her sister, tracing the familiar nicks in the banister with her fingertips. Janet blocked her path. And say what? A man threatened me, but my dog chased him off, and I can't even describe his face? Her laugh was brittle. You need help, Margaret. It's time we talked about guardianship. There it was. The word Margaret had dreaded, guardianship. As if she was a child again, too fragile for the world. She wanted to scream, to grab Janet by the shoulders and shake her. But the world didn't give her that luxury. Max nudged her leg, warm and insistent. Margaret felt his trust like a lifeline, stronger than Janet's doubts. I don't need a guardian. I need you to believe me, Margaret snapped. Janet's voice grew colder. This isn't about belief. It's about what's best for you. And if you won't see that, I have no choice but to call Henry. He'll know what to do. Margaret's nephew, Henry, was a bureaucrat with the soul of a filing cabinet. If he got involved, Margaret knew her life would shrink to paperwork and rules. She'd be monitored, supervised, erased. She could taste the bile in her throat. Call him if you want. I'm not going anywhere. Janet stormed out, muttering about ungrateful sisters and stubbornness. Margaret waited until the door slammed before slumping to the floor, shoulders shaking. Max nuzzled her cheek, licking away the hot sting of tears. Good boy, she whispered. You're the only one who gets it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Henry. Heard about last night. We should meet. There are things you don't know. Margaret's heart froze. What things? Was this just more family interference? Or was there something real buried under all the concern? She stared at the screen, Max breathing quietly at her feet, and realized she'd never felt so alone, or so determined to fight. What if the person you trust least holds the key to your survival? Margaret's meeting with Henry uncovers a family secret and forces her to question everything she thought she knew about loyalty and betrayal. They met in the blandest corner of a coffee shop, the kind with piped-in jazz and mugs too large for comfort. Henry looked the same as always, shirt pressed, tie knotted, smile as reassuring as a used car salesman's. Margaret's hand shook, but her voice didn't. "Why did you want to meet?" she asked, cutting straight through Henry's pleasantries. He hesitated, glancing around as if the ferns were listening. "Aunt Margaret, about last night, Janet called me. She's worried, but I'm not sure she's telling you everything." Margaret bristled. "Janet isn't the only one with secrets, Henry. Spit it out." He dropped his voice. "Look, there's something in Dad's will. About you. About the house. Janet wants to contest it. She thinks you're not fit to live here alone." Margaret's blood ran cold. So that was it. Not just concern, not just pity, money. Henry shifted, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Janet's been talking about assisted living. Selling the house. She says you can't handle things after last night." Margaret forced herself to breathe. "And what do you think?" Henry squirmed. "I think Janet likes to win. But there's more. Did you know your name wasn't always on the deed? Dad changed it before he died for you. He said you'd earned it." The room tilted. Margaret had never heard this. Janet had always said everything would be split, fair and square. Now her world shifted, foundations cracking. "So what do I do, Henry?" she asked, voice thin. He shrugged. "You fight. You call the police. You tell the truth. And you keep Max close. If Janet gets guardianship, you lose everything." Margaret stared at her nephew. The nephew who'd always seemed more robot than man. Was he really on her side? Or was this just another move in a family chess game she never asked to play? She stood, legs shaking. "Thank you, Henry. But if Janet comes after me, I won't go down quietly." Outside, Max waited, tail wagging as if he knew something had changed. Margaret stroked his head, feeling steel slide into her spine. She wouldn't be erased. Not by strangers, not by family, not by anyone. But as they walked home, Margaret realized something even darker. If her family could betray her for money, who else had she trusted for all the wrong reasons? Sometimes the scariest battles are fought behind closed doors. As Margaret confronts her sister, the truth finally explodes, and nothing about her family will ever be the same. The showdown came on a Sunday, rain slapping the windows hard enough to drown out any excuses. Janet arrived with a clipboard, legal papers peeking out from a pastel purse. She didn't bother with tea this time. "You can't keep pretending, Margaret," Janet announced, "all business. You're endangering yourself. The knife, the police, the dog, it's all too much. I'm filing for guardianship." Margaret felt the anger rise, cold and clean. "You mean you're filing to take my house? That's what this is about, isn't it?" Janet blinked, caught. "That's not fair. I just want what's best for you." Margaret pushed back her chair, hands gripping the table's edge. "You want control. You want to win. But Dad gave me this house because I fought for every inch of my life. I'm not handing it over now." Max growled, low and fierce, picking up the tension in the room. Janet flinched, taking a step back. "I'm calling the police," Margaret said, her voice steady. "About the attack. About everything. You're not my guardian. You're just afraid I'll survive without you." Janet's composure cracked, the mask slipping. "Fine. But don't come crawling to me when you realize you can't do it alone." Margaret smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "I haven't been alone in a long time. Not with Max." Janet slammed the door on her way out, the storm raging behind her. Margaret sank into her chair. Max pressing close, warmth against her side. For the first time in months she felt like herself, battered, yes, but unbroken. Yet as the thunder rolled, Margaret wondered, had she really won? Or was this just the end of round one? What does real freedom cost, and who pays the price? Margaret's final choice will leave you questioning everything you believe about family, forgiveness, and the power of loyalty. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, police interviews, and whispered gossip swirling through Maple Avenue. The officers took her seriously for once. Max, after a full checkup, was declared an exceptional service animal with remarkable protective instincts. Margaret kept that certificate on the fridge, proof to herself as much as anyone. Henry checked in, tentative but real, his robotic chill warming just enough to thaw a decade's distance. "You did it," he said awkwardly. "You stood up to her. To all of us, really." Margaret only nodded. She felt older but lighter. The world was still sharp-edged, still indifferent, but at least now she'd carved out a space that was hers. The attack faded from the neighborhood rumor mill, but her battles at home left cracks that would never quite heal. Janet stopped visiting, her silence louder than any argument. Margaret missed her sister, sometimes achingly, but she couldn't wish for the old peace built on denial. Instead, she found something better. Independence. The gratitude that came every morning when Max pressed his nose to her hand, tail wagging, ready to face the world together. Not as a victim, not as a burden, as a survivor. On the anniversary of that night, Margaret sat on the porch, coffee in hand, Max sprawled across her feet. She listened to the wind, the distant laughter of children, the ordinary sounds of a life hard won. "I forgive you, Janet," she said to the empty air, voice steady. "But I'm not coming back. I'm moving forward." Max thumped his tail, as if in agreement. Margaret smiled, her heart a little less heavy, her world a little wider. Because some battles you win by standing your ground, and some by finally letting go. Sometimes the fiercest bodyguard is the one who shows you how to fight for yourself. What does real freedom cost, and who pays the price? Margaret's final choice will leave you questioning everything you believe about family, forgiveness, and the power of loyalty. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, police interviews, and whispered gossip swirling through Maple Avenue. The officers took her seriously for once. Max, after a full checkup, was declared an exceptional service animal with remarkable protective instincts. Margaret kept that certificate on the fridge, proof to herself as much as anyone. Henry checked in, tentative but real, his robotic chill warming just enough to thaw a decade's distance. "You did it," he said awkwardly. "You stood up to her. To all of us, really." Margaret only nodded. She felt older but lighter. The world was still sharp-edged, still indifferent, but at least now she'd carved out a space that was hers. The attack faded from the neighborhood rumor mill, but her battles at home left cracks that would never quite heal. Janet stopped visiting, her silence louder than any argument. Margaret missed her sister, sometimes achingly, but she couldn't wish for the old peace built on denial. Instead, she found something better. Independence. The gratitude that came every morning when Max pressed his nose to her hand, tail wagging, ready to face the world together. Not as a victim, not as a burden, as a survivor. On the anniversary of that night, Margaret sat on the porch, coffee in hand, Max sprawled across her feet. She listened to the wind, the distant laughter of children, the ordinary sounds of a life hard won. "I forgive you, Janet," she said to the empty air, voice steady. "But I'm not coming back. I'm moving forward." Max thumped his tail, as if in agreement. Margaret smiled, her heart a little less heavy, her world a little wider. Because some battles you win by standing your ground, and some by finally letting go. Sometimes the fiercest bodyguard is the one who shows you how to fight for yourself. Can an old wound ever truly heal? When a letter from the past lands in Margaret's hands, she learns that family secrets can haunt, or save you long after the fighting is done. The morning after her visit to Janet, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of too-bitter coffee, Max's chin resting on her knee. She felt raw, exposed. Forgiveness was supposed to bring peace, but all she felt was emptiness. That's when the mail slot clattered, a sharp metallic sound that set Max barking. Margaret rose, more out of habit than curiosity. Bills, a glossy flyer, and then a faded yellowed envelope addressed in her father's unmistakable scrawl. Her heart thudded. Her father had been gone for years. She'd thought every memory, every secret had been buried with him. Hands trembling, Margaret opened the envelope. The letter inside was short, brutally honest, like everything her father ever said. Max, if you're reading this, it means things got hard, maybe harder than you deserved. You always fought harder than anyone, even when no one saw it. I left the house in your name because I trust you. I know you'll do right. Not by me. By yourself. If Janet makes life difficult, forgive her. She never understood what it cost you. But she loves you in her way. Take care of each other if you can. If not, take care of yourself. Love, Dad. Tears blurred the words. Margaret pressed the letter to her chest. All the battles, all the nights spent second-guessing herself. Had he known? Had he seen the loneliness she tried so hard to hide? Later, Margaret found Janet's hospital room empty. Just a nurse tidying up, the TV playing low. She left the letter on Janet's pillow, no note, no explanation. Some truths, she realized, needed to be discovered alone. At home, she sat with Max on the porch, the world quiet around her. For the first time, the silence felt like an open field, not a prison. Margaret stroked Max's fur, voice steady. We're going to be okay, you and me. The future was a mystery, filled with old scars and new hope. But Margaret felt something shift deep inside. A sense of belonging, not to her family, not to anyone's version of who she was supposed to be, but to herself. Because sometimes surviving meant letting the past in, not to haunt you but to set you free. But even now, as Margaret closes one chapter, life is waiting with a new twist, ready to test her courage and her loyalty one last time. When you think the storm has passed, life finds one last way to test your strength. For Margaret, the true meaning of loyalty, family, and freedom is revealed in a moment she never saw coming. The sun that day was so bright that even in her blindness Margaret could feel it. A warm spot on her face, trembling in the air like a promise of change. It seemed like everything was finally behind her. The knife attack, the war with her sister, the ghosts of old grudges, and even the heavy work of forgiveness. But life, as always, had its own ideas about justice. That morning Max was restless. He paced by the door, whining softly, sensing not trouble but a coming shift. This time, change didn't arrive as a threat. It came as an opportunity. In the middle of the day, there was a careful knock at the door. Who is it? Margaret called, tension tightening her shoulders out of habit. It's Linda, came a hesitant female voice. I'm from the support service for the visually impaired. You've been in our program, we're doing a check-in. Margaret sighed and opened the door, Max immediately pressing against her legs. Linda was young but sounded tired, the way people do when they've seen too much pain that isn't their own. I'm not here just for a survey, Linda said as she stepped into the living room. We have an opening in our Advanced Independence course. You're recommended as one of our most resilient clients. Margaret let out a dry laugh, almost happy. Independence? You mean when your whole family is convinced you can't take a step without their blessing? Independence, Linda answered seriously, is living how you want, no matter what anyone else thinks. You showed your family, and this whole neighborhood, that it's possible to be vulnerable and unbreakable at the same time. The words landed deeper than Margaret expected. After months of fighting, she'd learned to treat any praise like a jab. But right now she felt it was true. She had done it. And not alone. I'll think about it, Margaret said gently. I just need to make sure Max is ready for a new adventure. Linda smiled. Your dog is a legend in our organization. They want him to help train the younger guide dogs. This news brought not fear but a surge of pride and a small cold ache. To share Max? To let go of the one who'd been her true bodyguard and friend? And what if I'm not ready to let go? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You won't be letting go. You'll be giving others the chance to experience the loyalty you did. Linda answered as if she'd read her mind. That evening, Margaret sat for a long time on the porch, Max beside her. You know, old boy, I used to think I'd lose everything if I let down my guard. Turns out, you only become free when you stop being afraid to lose. Max put his head on her lap, as if agreeing. True loyalty isn't about fear of loss, but about the courage to let go. The next day, they set out together for the first class. This new chapter began not with a threat, but a choice. No one would tell Margaret anymore how to live, who to trust, or when to ask for help. Now she knew what independence really meant. Not loneliness, but being honest with yourself and those you care about. And looking back at the road behind her, Margaret finally saw not just the darkness around her, but the light within. Because the most important thing in life isn't to conquer fear, but to learn how to live in spite of it. This story isn't about an attack. It's about overcoming. About how, even when you can't see the road ahead, you can keep moving forward if you have someone truly loyal by your side.